Sheila here with Sirius Taurus Moon. This is Mars Day, Mars Hour, and Mars is close to Antares. So I'm going to bring the Antares because Antares is going to be quite important for our conversation. And this is a Christopher Warnock Antares Talisman, Memory, Intelligence, Protection from Evil Spirits and Demons. Very necessary for our conversation that's endowed. And this is also why I'm bringing the Talisman by Warnock, who is created it basically as a portal for honoring Antares and asking for that protection. And I'm asking for that protection for myself and those of my viewers who are against evil. Today morning, I ran into an energy, okay, that was okay with torturing children, turning them into slaves, and selling them or offering them as sex slaves, what Anneke Lucas is talking about, to people to appease certain people in key positions, to later assassinate them. And that energy was like, but it's okay to do that. And now I remind you that those key figures are not even extorted to do something in favor of humanity. They're extorted to do economical hitmanship in order to steal resources from humanity. So whoever was that energy that had this very, very haphazard, instinctive reaction by their mind control, believing that that is somehow okay, it just shows you how deep does the mind control and torture of those who are doing these things and doing these operations to start with. Now, that was not an easy moment. Plus, I'm dealing with the fact that as it uncovers, I have separated 5 years ago from a decade-long friendship with someone who was interested in being recruited to an intelligence and very likely to have been tortured and programmed. Very sensitive case, but they were supposed to torture me. And they have either parts of personalities or parts of their consciousness. When you deal with a programmed person or entity, you deal with a person that has sometimes several personas within them, and they may have genuine care and feelings, which is real and programmed to have the real emotions while having this type of persona. In fact, before we separated, to their defense, they said that they might be, it was around COVID, and I actually had a female boss that was quite abusive, and said that they might be thinking or talking against women, and this is to do with certain personality issues that they have. So that was kind of like an honest declaration that I got from them that basically signaled that I need to leave. And, when I confronted them with the own astrological transit that I would be having, they told me that they can't do it. Eventually, there was a crisis where they were partaking in abuse. I'm being incredibly sensitive around that because for sure they have been tortured before that. It always lies, and I'm not sure they weren't ritually abused in childhood at this point. So very, very sensitive, and it's not easy to hear that in the astral of literally being angry that they were still and are still um, I think under certain operation or something to try to target also me, and that's uh, beyond challenging. Okay, so it's a person that was close to me for a decade. Um, it's a person that um, I know probably has gone through torture, and it's a person that I have to get used to the fact that I may um, find out that they were involved in crimes against humanity, and maybe even a part of their own personas will have to become informed of. Um, and it's not about, people talk about narcissistic abuse. Well, narcissistic abuse is a part of MK Ultra programming or MK often programming, no touch torture, Aleister Crowley type of dark occult. And I chose a talisman that was produced, at least as far as I know, by an occultist, astrologer, and lawyer that is, as far as I know, does not operate with those type of demonic powers. Okay, again, as far as I know, if you are thinking to purchase the talisman, first of all, you're gonna need to know some astrology, and not to ask for. Don't do my mistake. I mean, I asked for diagnosis for my chart during Mercury retrograde, and I got the wrong. I got the wrong fixed star. Um, Suggested to the moon, what is actually the one next to Saturn. Um, Neither in that nor in the D9 is it next to the moon, but that was Mercury retrograde, Mercury retrograding. Um, Make sure you let Mercury do its thing and be in a good aspect. You're gonna need to know some astrology to work with a talisman. Um, but Again, people, do your own research, your own intuition. Um, because I definitely needed to bring Antares with Mars today, because it's not easy to be in these genres, coming from research or coming from even workplace. Okay, it can be something that you tapped into in your own workplace, or you made a certain, you're about to make a certain contribution, or it may be that you are this person, a lot of Gemini personas, they are thinking thoughts and not even aware that some of their thoughts might be completely genius. And your thoughts are also being, what can I say? We're living in kind of like a Nazi digital fascism regime on a global scale. If we hide from the fact that what I said is 100% scientific, then people will just not be able to put the finger on what's on. To me, it took a freaking decade. Okay? It took a freaking decade because with all my research and everything, I was not thinking, with my mother, that she just wrote a book from her imagination and then events starts happening and the entire family, was put under such supposedly hidden surveillance. um, and and so um, okay. And then I went to academia, participated in One Voice, left when they wanted to turn it into a goodbye Bibi party. um, did research on the body-mind questions in a medicine fraction of a millisecond before COVID, wrote a satire with a symbol that my then friend told me was about officers, and it was actually the symbol of the IDF. And the satire was about the cult, mind you. Um, so it's not that I don't know why, but here what's happening is that more and more common people, okay, I'm a civilian, I'm not a public officer, employee, or anything like that, and those things were used to be done to public officers and activists. I was neither. And going to a meeting of One Voice does not being an activist or anything like that. It's like, I wasn't going with the cameras to Gaza and exposing, that wasn't even my trajectory. Um, okay, I was, in fact, I think that the Palestinians will not be able to be sovereign if they are continuing to find their resistance by human trafficking and intelligence-like methods. And when I say intelligence, I mean the MK Ultra, MK Often, and the little hats involved with esoteric tactics enmeshed with the combination of Kabbalah with Aleister Crowley is something that most people are not even aware of. Okay. In fact, I was fraction of a millisecond from studying a Kabbalistic Tarot course just for fun, not knowing the slightest of a thing about what those esoterics are being used for. And I didn't participate in that course eventually, but I think that warding off of evil and demonic possession, because did you know that most of the intelligence in the world is done by demonic possession? Like, as an academic, I find it fascinating. Um, so would warding off demonic possession grant world peace? I don't know. And demonic possession cannot take over unless people are severely tortured, which means that most of the evil in the world is just extremely tortured people. But to wake up to a morning where people are looking for the kidnapped, millions of kidnapped people over the place. I saw a video of a BIPOC lady, woman of color that moved outside of the US and talking about a lot of her friends popping up babies while children are being kidnapped from preschool. So there's a shit ton of dumbfuckery happening in the world. And we're just being more exposed to that. Now, another topic I want to talk about that's very related to this topic is the fact that the century of Pluto-Neptune sextile was the nuclear century. And I think it is fair to call the last century, and I don't mean century by 1900s, I mean by in between two wars century. This is fair to call it the nuclear century. But more so to speak, it is the century where mafia and nuclear power and oil blended well together, could get to agreement, and the easy aspect, the harmonious aspects between planet, namely the 60 degrees, the 120 degrees, okay, the sextile and the trine, um, are the aspects where, and there are some, I think, like the 72 degree, that are the minor aspects that are considered harmonious aspects. Those simply mean agreements. Okay, my colleague, why do Dan Waits, not Tom Waits, Dan Waits, pinpointed that Hiroshima and Nagasaki fell when Aries and Pluto agreed, when they had a harmonious aspect. And it was the opening trine, okay, where Pluto was in between Cancer and Leo, and Aries was in the beginning of Aries. So, okay, Aries ingressed into Aries in the around the Big Depression, and then trine Pluto, and then throughout that time we would have Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And if we think about an A bomb, and nuclear energy, it takes both the sextile with Pluto and Neptune, and an agreement with Aries to drop. But to manufacture, um, we also get nuclear energy being seen as something that can power a city or take down a city. Okay, depending on how it is produced and fission or fusion. And that's the dual nature of Neptune in agreement with Pluto. Pluto is nuclei, Neptune is radiation. These folks are not going to continue to agree for another century. In fact, as of the 2060's, that is a fractions of a millisecond when you consider the fact that that this current world unraveling was planned for a century. We are fractions of a millisecond, okay? The current Kissingers are not planning for another Gladio. And Gladio operations was when drug lords, mafia, Neptune agreed with Manhattan Project and the byproducts of the Industrial Revolution, Pluto, and oil companies, Pluto. Okay? Of course, with religion, or the mythic religion and crusades, Neptune. And now we have another bisextile, a la Gladio, but the inverted picture, which means Neptune is in Aries, colonialism, rather than in Neptune, pedosexual ICC judges. Hold that for a second in your mind. Um, who said that Westerners do not practice Zen? Um, that's our juristic system. And we have a Neptune opposition to Gladio. And and all the organizations and military alliances formed around that time. Was in Leo. The mythical, not the mythical, yeah, mythical power, because it was sextile Neptune, of the solitary leader. Okay, and that was both in the age of ideology that preceded. That was both the fascist leaders, but also the P5 leaders, the winners of the war, the mythization through assassination of JFK. Okay, the I am a donut speech in Berlin, the fall of Berlin Wall, that would later be. And now Pluto is in Aquarius, the off with their head sign. And this is why we see all the extortion cults being so megalittically exposed. Okay, some of these people survived the cult. Monica Lucas survived the cult in, I think she was out there by 73, around the 70's. She was kidnapped around the 70's. We're in 2025. The people that abused her were there since the late 40's. So, and 50's. So, Dutro. So, Lucas Dutro is not your age. Dutro is 10 years. Okay, Dutrow was born in 1956, about a week before after Peter R. de Vries. Annika Lucas says she was born in 1963, so it's a decade difference. Um, quite an important decade, because we had the oil crisis of 73, and it was possible to criticize Israel, which would be necessary. Which would be necessary for the quarrel. Basically, Uranus began to fall off the B6 Tau, and began to slowly apply to square Pluto. I think I don't remember exactly the 70s. Uranus went into Libra, and there was a revolution. Okay, that had a dual effect, and I think began to enable the door out of these death cults. So yeah, this decade mattered a lot, because the decade of the 60s is a completely different conglomerate with Pluto-Uranus conjunction. Okay, then Uranus would go on from the conjunction. It would not square Pluto or sextile Pluto. It would simply move on from the conjunction, and this those unfortunately techniques in Heidelberg were even perfected, because they learned chaos theory and interference in chaos, and it got to academia. So there was it was both a window where in the 70s Uranus into Venus sign. Right now, for example, we had Uranus in Taurus, and in the Deutero in the 96, Uranus I think was going Aquarius, going from Capricorn to Aquarius, moving to its home sign. So, but that was yeah. Before that, Pluto was in Leo, and that was that was and Pluto would be squaring Saturn. Pluto was squaring Saturn for Deutero, and Pluto was opposing Saturn for the 60s children that have Saturn in Pisces. I think Annika Lucas still has Saturn in Aquarius, if she was born in 63. But the 60s, 6, 7 would have Saturn return right now. So they would have Saturn opposing Pluto, Uranus conjoining Chiron. But already Chiron was in Pisces, which is a wound around spiritual beliefs that contributed a lot to the abuse. Rules both religion and children. The Deutero, they had Saturn square Pluto, Uranus in Leo, Uranus co-present with Saturn for some of them. For Deutero, definitely yes, but not conjuncting. And it was a Urano-Leo, and indeed Mark Deutero was an electric engineer, which is the science of working with light and turning light into electricity. Uranus also rules electricity. Yeah. I think during the 60s they would perfect it to use that to create a personality. I mean, Sun already is personality, but with Pluto, but then with the conjoining in Virgo, they would unfortunately refine it to a technique, and that is what Anneke went through in Heidelberg. As terrible as it is, so right now we have in another bisextile. Uranus is in Gemini, which means that children are being programmed by the masses, and this is why we see a lot of kidnapping of children, missing children, child labor issues coming resurfacing. Pluto is in Aquarius, which is totalitarian and global. Yes, for those who were excited by my saying about Israel, yeah, a part of the things that were the outcome of the pre-post Gladio phase were the two intelligences of Israel that were completely enmeshed with that death cult in their occultism. So this is something that causes a lot of trouble. We see it with the Epstein and so on and so forth. Again, any intelligence, in fact, when the Israelis prided themselves on being able to get information without torture, they marketed that to high school children as trying to recruit them to intelligence. They marketed is the MI6 didn't want the no torture methods of investigation. In retrospective, I think that they were inventing the no touch torture. Again, it's just that the level of trust declines the more we see the prevalence of extortion cults. And that's natural and normal. And if every other woman that divorces a narcissist ended up being affiliated with intelligence, then people begin to beg the question, and I think it's fair to say that the oil crisis of '73 put Israel in a place where Iran was helping Israel, and there was intense work of the oil companies to not give Israel that much leverage as a geopolitical, and I think a part of the fact that Iran has nuclear powers, as they say they don't, and they do, and they don't, and they do. They have their own textile factory at this point, very likely. And again, I'm not an insider, but I think that that was, together with looking for oil in Iraq missions, an attempt to decentralize the Israeli nuclear power by decentralizing from the oil perspective. Okay, and that would mean something that's completely nothing to do with Israel. It's just that the oil companies, now we have Noble Energy, but I don't know who owns Noble Energy. But the oil companies are the same oil companies. Talk about the Rockefellers, and we're talking about companies like Esso only being able to gaze into the Middle East um, and that nuclear, more than it protects Israel, is protecting Rockefellers. So a lot of the war crimes that Israel is actually being accused of were by proxy of oil companies. But to get that level of analysis, we would need to understand how do oil companies appease one another and the relative monarchies, and this is by the classified project funded by public money, and the many things that Anneke Lucas is talking about. There are many other survivors I know. Episode 9 of Alandra, that was supposed to be an Epstein, is a must-see for anybody who asks where the Epstein lists are. The notion of mind control, I know from Anneke that she is working with survivors, and the topic of technological interface is a big issue. So I'm absolutely not singling out either the intelligences in Israel or Israel, because the problem is global and the problem pertains to the oil companies. But definitely, I'm aware that in 1973, with the oil crisis, Israel's place in the discourse was decentralized. I know it from academia. You weren't able to criticize Israel in any good peer-reviewed journal. Um, that was simply impossible up until 1973. And then Israel kind of began to regain its status towards 2023. And then Hasbara was by design collapsed, which is a lot of Israelis that were completely not informed with those levels of analysis, or informed and thought that something would play in their favor, discovered that a debt extortion treason cult is a debt extortion treason cult, whether it's Zionist, Palestinian, Chinese, Russian, African, British, or American, or European. So now, what does it mean that Neptune will stop agreeing with Pluto in the 2060s, or will square Pluto in the 2060s? Very simply put, it means that we're going to have the karmic collapse. And when I say collapse can be into a state where towards the trine we will have a booming nuclear energy powered cities, and then with the in conjunction we'll have to deal with the radiation. Again, depopulation by radiation. I mean, that is obviously a possibility. It also means that the laser weapons, Kela David, for example, that are being traded, NATO, this is your 5%. NATO's 5% has not been attacked for. But Neptune in the coming 15 years is going to go over Rahu and Lilith of NATO's chart, which means I didn't experience a Neptune Rahu conjunction myself. I experienced it in a talisman with Venus exalted, and that was a deeply psychological, mystic type of. It's probably not what the what the military alliance seeks in the house of budget and occult. It means that there's going to be very mystical experiences related to what these 5% do. And people might even fatally recover from, through this induced psychosis, fatally recover from the programming that they were programmed, um, or leak information. So, but they might also fall into programming. Okay, that's the dual nature of Neptune. Um, And Aries is right now toying with Rahu of NATO, my Mercury, and head of NATO's moon. And I do not wish you to have a direct touch to, of your moon to Aries. But some people with Aries moons do have that natally. And I have the square natally. So it's too early for me to predict what it is, but it's kind of acting like Mossad, in the sense that it creates a war with trickery. Now, at the same time, okay, it's not something that we haven't seen capitalized on during the Gladio. But Aries going through the Rahu of NATO with Chiron is something that um, is happening next to my Mercury. I really don't know completely to delineate. Um, there's definitely going to be an intense amount of chaos. It could be the class lawsuits around the so-called military operation and the jabs, because Aries has to do with the jabs, but I don't know exactly. We'll have to wait for this transit. And Neptune is going. It's some 15 years before Neptune is coming to tag along. Chiron will no longer be in Aries, but um, it's around the ruler of my fourth and seventh. So yes, it's something that is happening right now, and I still have to meditate on what the effect of that is. Definitely, it has to do with the fact that I began to cover Natu's chart, kind of. As a coping mechanism since 7th October or later, like there was just something about that. Um, I don't know what it means for current Secretary General. I don't know what it. Oh, I have. I'm not gonna address that. Because that I thought that's Uranus on the midheaven. It's also his eighth house, so um, yeah, but really too early to say. What is this Aries doing? This is another transit that's not the easiest, and it's with Chiron. Um, but Chiron comes to be a wounded healer and the sense of embodiment. For me, that's probably is why I'm talking about sexual sovereignty as imperative to getting the full picture when it comes to intelligence, and the failed intelligence operations due to the lack of sexual sovereignty of the people involved, and I predicted that for the Saturn Neptune. Somebody has a solar return. Also, Ruby Williams has a solar return the day before. He was looking into aliens, I know. Yes, aliens is not my strongest. The closest to aliens that I know is Moldavite crystals. um, I ran into something that looked like alien energy when I tried to dig down the slopes of the Dead Sea, um, and I tried to prepare the soil for to dig for to create the tiny dams to protect from the flood, and have. But that was the only time that I really ran into something that looked like energy, and I set boundaries to these aliens. um, but yeah, I didn't return to that area for quite a while because I don't know if it's even safe to travel there in public transportation. Um, so I guess the aliens got their land. New Egypt, they call it. Um, but that was one of the first times I understood what Americans are talking about. Um, what does it mean that the laser-based weaponry will no longer be in agreement with the oil companies? The Pluto oil, Neptune mafia, and laser. Now, it's towards the 2060's. So a lot of people that even the people that wish to live to 100, are like, that's gonna be not my problem, not my monkeys. Um, but nobody that operates at this basic style is exempt from the implications that people are already planning to. And this is the time where oil companies will no longer Gladio. They will no longer work with the mafia. Mafia will no longer be able to rely on being an oil company informant or intelligence. Neptune rules intelligence in secret societies. Oil companies will no longer fund secret societies. Okay? Or they will be in an argument with the secret societies. They already are. We already seen that happening. Okay? Because Pluto is in Aquarius. Okay? But we should be in Aquarius for the 2060s. Pluto in Aquarius is an onset to the 2060s. We should not mistake it for the 2060s. We have not seen in this century Pluto squaring Neptune, and what we have from previous centuries is what survived Google. Most of the kidnapped people in BIPOC kidnapped people and not BIPOC kidnapped preschool children do not show up on Google and on the missing lists. Okay, so this is just something that's happening today. Then imagine a century and a half ago. Neptune rules missing people. Um, uh, Personality cults, the occult, psychology, and psychological warfare will no longer be agreeing with ritual. Okay, Neptune rules ritual as well. Pluto rules the occult. I don't even know to tell. I mean, um, like, I cannot even imagine a world in which Aleister Crowley does not end up as a personality cult that does military operations. Like, I've never lived in that century, good or bad. Um, a lot of the mafia and secret societies that could work with the oil companies. I'm not even notice that I don't put the unit of analysis government. Okay, government is the same unit of analysis as celebrity, and Pluto Neptune has been the celebrity politician century, and celebrities and politicians are kind of like both MK Ultra. So, but it also means that art, composers, and um, and oil companies and deeply psychological, psychologists and psychiatrists won't agree. Art therapy will not be something that people necessarily support from a psychological point of view. There are going to be arguments between psychologists and politicians and artists, shaman healers, and drug lords. Okay, Gladio gave us jazz music popularized. But Gladio also gave us a monitoring to black people that they're drug lords. Because that was their programming by design in Gladio. The black people were set to trade cocaine and funnel that through the jazz music. Okay, Richard Feynman did shit ton of LSD. Nobody. Terence McKenna, okay, popularized psychedelics. Terence McKenna knew and told that if somebody wants to even try that, they should begin with quite lengthy time spent in the library first before they even think to source or touch a drug. But that's not necessarily how it would be introduced to the masses under classified projects. Okay? Yes, thank you. But if Terence McKenna was a black jazz singer, everybody would be talking about it in a different scope of light altogether. In fact, I do believe that he was quite aware that this is so, and maybe wanted to break that, or break that division. But I don't know how many children were raped on MDMA in the process. And MDMA, by the way, can also be used in different settings to curate from trauma of being sexually molested or abused as a child. Okay, that is at least as far as I know. I never tried that, and I don't intend to try that. Um, but this is um, most of us cannot even imagine a century where their psychiatrist doesn't tell them that they should see a shrink. They want to work on the patterns that um, could make them adaptable to society. Then, when they do a mass shooting, everybody complains, even though both the drugs and the shrink encourage that. They can't say it. Um, but when it comes to those disagreements, or those growing disagreements, it means that people don't plan for a century of Gladio again, and they are preparing for the fact that there are going to be quite some Neptunian figures are going to be at odds with the politics, the trade of oil, the economy. Okay, I've already seen the economy transferred from Pluto to Neptune, because when Pluto ingressed, we saw nothing. A couple of banks were doing a little bit of a titty dance, and came back to balance themselves. But when Neptune ingressed, it was the tariffs. Okay, and Neptune is going to ingress with Saturn on a world degree. So that was the China USA balance being ticked off, and that was definitely felt. Okay, a lot of even Israeli companies that the Tnuva, the company that sells the cheese or the cottage cheese, um, is now ruled by owned by a Chinese company. Okay, that this was one of the pillars of Israeli local produce. Okay, that's and even the families that could not really afford too much food, they would have the subsidized bread with white cheese or cottage cheese if they wanted to go extravagant. This Friday we went extravagant. We bought cottage cheese. Yes, very nice, with some cucumbers, a tomato, and a couple of leaves of lettuce. And this is, I now notice that my mother managed to excrete fresh avocado from. It is. It's fresh avocado. I'm praising that. I know. Exactly. No, the other way around. Which is, it has to be done with diligence. I did not use the avocado because I would have to be meticulous, and this is so amazing. Um, Thank you. Okay, wait a second.
משהו ישר אבל.
Yep.
לא חבל על
No, it's okay, it's not gonna spill. So,
מה זה לזרוק?
not now. Not now, thank you. So this is, by the way, the booming economy of Israel that had the shekel been stable through 2 years of war, and we had start saving for peace. Knowing nothing about currency in 2023, I just stayed baffled and overwhelmed by the fact that we're having a 2 years war, actively committing what the UN calls genocide. And I think that is very difficult when we talk about genocides. If that was not the intention, it really didn't come across. I mean, of course, the intention was to make it clear for those who come to work in the oil mines and gas in Palestine to have a clear ground, namely a ground zero. But why not? Why not have Israelis doing that? I mean, they're not going to benefit from that, but. But for these 2 years, it held the Israeli shekel. And if you think about war economy, one thing you don't predict is your currency to actually be strong. I don't think I want to know how is the shekel strong. But I think we're going to find out. And this is what those that were behind the shekel being strong only during an active act that is later called genocide, perhaps by the very entities that triggered, encouraged, and supported that somebody else would do it. Okay? Any country is a list of corporations. The land is Chinese, so are the local produce pillars of factories. The ministries are allocated to Chinese personnel and automated, and there are some Americans eyeing the soil. I mean, what's underneath it. The oil is Rockefeller, but oh, the flag. The flag has done war crimes. Um, for those who are looking for Epstein list without knowing about torture and mind control and extortion cults and how they work, you're gonna have a list. You're gonna do the same, the equivalent of litigating Israel, and then same dumb fuckery under a different flag. My prediction is that this is going to that we pass the torch. We were passed the torch by the Third Reich, and we passed it on to Palestine, 7th of October, 2023. And 84 years from now, they're gonna be the new, if not already are. I mean, they were copying the good things, which also means they're copying the bad things. And me seeing Mama Taliban's return to Gaza is a telltale that they're running the country in a way that is set to doom it in an onset that won't really grant sovereignty throughout this century, but 2061, we have a square between Neptune and Pluto. So we do not. Where does human trafficking go into the mix? We're going to find out for sure, because the entities are going to be fighting with one another. So human trafficking is wealth consolidation on natural resources and ontological unit human trafficking. What happened? Human trafficking, okay, is wealth consolidation on natural resources. The problem with that statement? If your real estate is invested in that, let's just say it's not intergenerational wealth. That's what happens when those that are supposed to drug the trafficked children and those that are supposed to mind control them are fighting with one another. That's what we're expected to have in the 2060s. It's 40 years from now, less than 40 years from now. In fact, it's almost 30 years from now. Some of us might even be alive. um, and now one of the covers of drug lords that they will keep saying that they don't harm children and women, but human trafficking is raping until somebody is trafficked. That kind of harms children and women, and they kind of do this to younger and younger people in extortion calls. That was they cover up as informants. And what we do when those who practice Aleister Crowley mind control occult techniques, I know I've addressed that. With those who drug the children and those who are supposed to mind control them, or get them possessed by demons, so to speak. What do we do when the how do I say that without saying Inquisition streams of religion? There were, by the way, a Muslim Inquisition. The Christian Inquisition was a response to a Muslim Inquisition. And and then there were Jews. They're stuck in the middle. By the way, if you live in Augsburg, other than the two lovely dogs that are celebrities there, if you're Catholic, then you can live for 88 cents per year in a village, but you have to be really Catholic. Converting would be very difficult, and you have to be an Augsburg resident, which I guess would fit a social criteria of some sort. So a shout out to highly Catholic people in Augsburg. And very likely they won't be able to hold not getting dividends from that. It's a lovely place, Augsburg.